Amen. Okay. Well, we are continuing through some different miscellaneous topics that were given to me, and so I'm trying to get through each of those, and I still have more left, and some of you have asked me about how long we're doing this class and so on, and I plan to continue doing it for a while. Yes, so we need to do that.
Keeps me busy.
Need to get some more homework. Right. Well, I probably will have that for the next subject. So I don't have it today, but the next subject is going to be a little bit more.
As much as you complain about it.
Yeah.
I love that. It keeps me. Maybe that's my energy. The homework.
Well, maybe so.
I got to do my homework because I don't want Pastor to get upset with me.
It keeps you going.
It keeps me going.
Yes. So we probably will for the next subject because someone had asked me about the beliefs of the Baptist Church, and that is not something you can just really remember. It's really something you need to have written down. And so I'm going to give some handouts, but probably going to give some actual homework to answer some questions as well. Joni?
Peter, too, he gave me a book I read, too. It was a small book about the history of the Baptist Church. Maybe he can tell
Probably called The Trail of Blood, maybe?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. Yeah, that was one that actually probably about 2 years ago at our church, I went through a series on the whys of the Christian faith, is what we called it. And one of the things I talked about was why I'm a Baptist. And so we actually went through all that. I recommended that book, The Trail of Blood. And I think you probably read it, Diana, as well.
Yes, I have.
And it's not, I think Carol Jackson was that his name? No.
I don't remember.
Don't believe me, that's wrong. Something else, Carol. Anyway, wrote that book. And I think it's a pretty kind of concise synopsis of the history of the Baptists. And I recently have been thinking a little bit more about that, because there are a lot of Christians in the world of many different denominations. And we don't want to think, somehow we have a monopoly on that and we're right and everybody else is wrong. Nothing like that. But I will say that, the Baptists do have a very unique heritage. I'll just say it that way. There's a lot of other good ones that are not Baptists, and that's fine. But I am thankful to be a Baptist because of the heritage. And of course, I was raised Baptist. But more than just being raised Baptist, I had to think about it myself. Say, do I want to be a Baptist or what? And I can't find anything I'd rather be. First and foremost, I'm a Christian, right? And so I want to make sure that, people say, what's your religion? I'm not going to say I'm a Baptist. I'm going to say I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. And then being a Baptist is more of a denominational aspect of that because Christendom, as a whole encompasses all these denominations and groups. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can go pretty far with that. Some people include Catholicism in that. Some people don't, whatever. Usually it is included in that. But nonetheless, when we really look at all those different denominations and where they came from, really, from my understanding of the Baptist heritage, it seems to me that we have a pretty, I won't say a perfect heritage, but a very clean heritage. It's just, we as Baptists, never were in the Catholic Church. A lot of these other denominations, for example, Methodism and Presbyterianism, I'm not knocking those. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that they came out of Catholicism versus the Baptists really never were. In fact, Charles Spurgeon, and I guess I'm teaching the wrong thing today, but Charles Spurgeon talked about that when he said we were reformers before Luther and Calvin were born. He said that. And it's not to be conceited or haughty. I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I don't. But I'm thankful for what God has given me. I'm thankful. That book was called The Trail of Blood just because, and I have more upstairs, by the way, if anybody wants a copy. I think I do. Maybe I should check before I say that, but I think I have 2 or 3 still of those, so if anybody wants one, I can sort of give it to you. And it's called The Trail of Blood just because, so many Baptists were killed, were martyred because of their faith. And the unique thing about, I'll say this, and then we'll go to our lesson today, but the unique thing about being a Baptist is that, Baptists have always stood very strong for the idea of individual soul liberty. That I'm at liberty to believe what I believe, you're at liberty to believe what you believe, and I can't coerce you. I can't force you to believe what I believe. And that's just such a fundamental doctrine that we hold to, that it's our own conscience, right, that we're to follow as God leads us. So I look forward to dealing with some of that. What I'm going to try to do actually is take the word Baptist, Baptist, and divide it up and make it an acrostic, which basically has different things for each letter that correspond to our values. And that may help a little bit. I can also give you some other things. And really, what we've been studying the last, 9-10 months, those things we've been studying really are the beliefs of the Baptist Church, pretty much is what that is. But I think maybe getting some kind of a succinct synopsis of that, and kind of what's distinctive. A lot of times we call them the Baptist distinctives. And the reason we call it that is just because, there's a lot of things that are common between the denominations. When you look at all the other denominations around, most of the time there's certain things we all believe. We all believe Jesus died on the cross and rose again. If you don't believe that, you're not a Christian,
Right.
And other things, the second coming of Christ, even though there may be different ideas about how he's coming back and that sort of thing. But some of those very, very basic things, about Scripture, we believe it's the Word of God, things like that are pretty common across denominations. But we do feel that there are certain distinctive things about the Baptists that kind of stand out. And those are the things that maybe I'll emphasize. And it'll help us just to see, why do we have the heritage we have? So with that being said, when I go into all that, I'm going to probably give some homework so we can keep that in our heads.
Yes.
Yolanda?
God is God. There's only one God, right? So
Amen.
when you get to telling people what church you go to and stuff, and they kind of shy away, but just like I tell them, I say it's only one God.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we believe in is one God.
Right.
And God is God. Y'all have y'all different words y'all say, and we have ours. But I like this church because you break it down, Pastor. You break it down, and I understand them. Other churches I go to, it's just like a fashion show or something. They be up there running around and stuff, but I like this church. You break it down.
Thank you. Well,
Yes.
I want to be Bible-based.
Yeah, that's what you do.
And I don't think I'm better than anybody else, but I will say there are a lot of churches that maybe are a little more focused on the show, right?
Yeah,
a little
the
more.
show.
And I don't want to be that way. I love music and I love all those things, but we got to just get into the Bible because
They be stepping on
that's
my
why
toes
we're
and
here,
stuff,
right?
They be
And
up there shouting.
and sometimes it's a little loud too. I've been in some
Yeah.
places I'm like, I didn't come here to get. I need earmuffs, I'm not trying to make fun of them, but I do think we do need there needs to be this centrality of Scripture that we say this is the most important thing, and it doesn't mean we don't have anything, but let's really make sure that we focus on that. Yes, there are many different churches, and a lot of them are good, and that are not Baptist, but we just want to make sure that we're sticking with what the Bible says. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we get confused too. Like I was driving to church this morning, and every time I drive to church, I drive by the Mormon church. Mm-hmm. And when I drive by the Mormon church, I see they're filled up by 9 o'clock in the morning. And in my heart, I'm thinking, why are people going to that? And there's this great deception, with these cults, with Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, things like that, where some man has come up with some idea and people follow that. So we want to make sure we're not following a man, right? But make sure we're following what God says. And that's what we want. Hopefully whoever the man is, because you got to have somebody teaching, right? It doesn't just sit there and, you got to have somebody teach. So hopefully whoever that is leading people right. And hopefully he's leading them to the Scripture. So with that being said, someone asked a question about what's a virtuous woman. Now, obviously, I don't fit the description of a virtuous woman, right? But since the question was asked, I feel very unqualified to speak on this. I feel as though I'm not the right one to do it. But speaking of the Bible, right? All we're going to do is just go to the Bible, okay? And I'm just going to give you a few thoughts. So, Proverbs 31 is the passage today. So I was asked that question about the Proverbs 31 woman, and I would love to have somebody else do this, but I'm just going to give a few things from the Bible here. Proverbs 31, so that's the last chapter in the book of Proverbs, and I appreciate that interest of the one who asked about that. How can we know what a Proverbs 31 woman is? And I think the best thing to do, honestly, is just to read through the passage and just kind of make a note about a few things that I think are strong qualities. Now, as we do this, and as we read the passage and look into some things, just do understand as well that these qualities should be present in many ways in men and women alike. And so when we read something like Proverbs 31, yes, it's a description of a virtuous woman. There's no question about that. But that doesn't mean that a man can't learn a lot from it. I'm reading this, I'm like, man, I'm not even as virtuous I ought to be. So it can help all of us. Men and women, help them to have some of these virtues. So let's look at Proverbs 31. And let's just break this up. How about that? Let's just go around and read. I think that would be a good thing to do. So we have about 31 verses. So Proverbs 31 has 31 verses. And so let's just go around here. I can do the first one here. I'll read the first verse and we'll go to Miss Yolanda. We'll have number 2, Diana. So maybe we can just kind of zigzag or something. Then it'll be Joni and then Roy and then Veronica. I guess Veronica can read 2, right? And we come back around. Just go back and forth and I'll read 2 when it comes to me. We'll just go back and forth like that. So let's do that on Proverbs 31. And I'll begin in verse number 1. The words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him.
With my son, and with the son of my womb, and with the son of my vows.
Give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings.
It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink.
Lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the affected.
Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that may be of heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more.
Back to you there, Roy. I think you're verse 8.
Open the mouth for the dumb in the cause of all such as are pointed to destruction.
Open thy mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the needy.
Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies.
Oh, the heart of her husband, dove safety and trust in her. Both trust in her.
And then so that
he shall have no need of spoil.
she will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. Back to you, Yolanda, verse 14.
She is like the merchant ship. She brightens her food. She bringeth her food from afar.
She rises also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens.
She considereth a field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hand she planteth a vineyard.
She girdeth her loins with strength, and straightens her arms.
She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff.
Is it me?
That's back to Roy there.
Oh, she stretcheth out her hand to the poor, she reacheth forth her hand to the needy.
She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet.
She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple.
Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land.
She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come.
She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness.
She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness.
Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her.
Many daughters have done virtually, but thou acceptest their all.
Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let not her own works praise her in the gates.
Okay, so this is, a wonderful description of what we would look for if we were to find a virtuous woman who, it's said here, whose price is far above rubies. And so one way to kind of think about that is in the same way that if you were to be hunting in the ground for something valuable, you would come across all kinds of junk before you got to something valuable, right? As you were hunting and searching, or even if you were mining, you're going to find all sorts of elements, all sorts of minerals, before you find what you're actually looking for. I remember there was a time when my brother and I liked to go metal detecting. And I remember going around some different churches and trying to find old coins. It was some old church from the 1800s. We were hoping to find things. And we found maybe a coin here and there. But I remember before we got that, we found nails, we found bottle caps, we found everything else imaginable too. And it was almost 1 in 1,000. You find all these other things first. And it's the same way with a virtuous woman. You're going to find a lot that are not worth a whole lot that are not going to be very virtuous before you're going to find one. And so he says her price is far above rubies. When you find a virtuous woman, you've really found something rare. You found something that there's not very many of, is what he's saying here. So this particular passage says it's the words of King Lemuel. Now, we don't know much about that. I'm not going to get sidetracked by it. We're not really sure who that is. Some people think that it's just Solomon, that this was another epithet for him, some kind of a name that maybe was given to him, and this would have been given by his mother in that case. Does anyone know who the mother of Solomon was? David's wife. Starts with the letter B. Bathsheba. Remember, she was the one that he took in adultery, and the first son died. Remember that? The first son that they had died, and then she had a son after that. His name was Solomon, and Solomon ended up being the heir to the throne. But if this is written by Solomon, it would mean that basically he's learning it from Bathsheba. Is that true? I don't know. I don't know. Some think that this is somebody else altogether. But whoever this person is, when we're reading this passage, we're actually learning from whatever this woman is saying. When he says his mother taught him, she said these things. Now, some people think that when we come to verse number 10, that it's a different speaker there rather than the same one at the beginning. But nonetheless, to me, it seems like the passage is one. It seems to me that the whole thing is being spoken by whoever Lemuel's mother is. And so she talks to him about, the son of my womb, the son of my vows. So, the one who's very dear to her because he's come from her. He's her very son. And she says, it's not for kings to drink wine. Why? Because when kings and princes and those in authority get drunk, guess what? They start doing things they shouldn't do. They start perverting judgment. They don't think straight. They don't think right. And so she's saying, this is not for those in authority. And she also says, give not thy strength unto women, nor thy waist that which destroyeth kings. Now, what does that mean? Well, what she's saying there is, and it would be interesting if it is Bathsheba talking to Solomon, he didn't take the advice, because she's actually saying, to guard against the common habit of the day, which was to have multiple wives. That's what they were doing at that time. And we know that Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines, so basically 1,000 wives. Now, do you know what happened at the end of his life? Well, his heart was turned away. His heart was turned away from God. And because he gave himself to all of this, and he ended up with 1,000 wives, which is just hard to even imagine. But when you don't do it God's way, then there's a large chance that things are going to go awry. And that's exactly what happened there. He took all those wives, and what happened, a lot of those women that he took, remember what we talked about the virtuous woman? Well, if it's 1 in 1,000, actually Solomon says he did not find 1 in 1,000. So it's even more than that. If he had 1,000 wives, most of those wives were wives who worshipped other gods. And that's a terrible thing. Someone who believes in God, someone who's a Christian, should never take a spouse that doesn't believe. They shouldn't be doing that, because that can turn your heart away. So Solomon has 1,000 wives. A lot of them don't believe in God. A lot of them are worshiping false gods. So what happened? His heart, in the end, was turned away from God after them, because they took his heart. So if you think about the price being far above rubies, and Solomon in Ecclesiastes saying, I haven't found one good woman among 1,000. Well, in that case, he's basically saying, I couldn't find one among all my wives. Is basically what he's saying. But, the truth of the matter is that he didn't learn this lesson. He didn't learn this lesson that a king, who Solomon ended up being, he should not give himself to that. He shouldn't have this harem, as we call it, of 1,000 wives, because ultimately it's going to turn his heart away. But God's way is one man, one woman, as we know with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God made it that way in the very beginning. One man, one woman. And that man is to find a woman who is a godly woman. And it's going to be hard to find a virtuous woman, but he wants to find someone, hopefully he himself can set an example as well, but he wants to find someone who's going to help him and not turn his heart away. And so he eventually has his heart turned away because of all those wives that he took. So that's why she says, don't give don't give your strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. Many kings have been destroyed because they've taken many, many wives. So, good advice here about not taking drink and not taking strong drink. It perverts our minds, and we say and do things we should not do otherwise. But then, when we come to verse 10, the question is, who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies? So, what I'm going to do is just give a few thoughts that you can write down about the virtuous woman. And it just comes directly from this passage. So the first thing we find is that she is valuable. She is rare and valuable. Her price is far above rubies. A woman who is a virtuous woman, a woman who exhibits the qualities listed in this particular chapter, is a rare woman, is a very valuable woman, and someone that any man who has a head on his shoulders ought to understand that this is the kind of woman that I want. Now, as I said, I think Solomon said, I barely found a man among 1,000, so it's not any better either way. But the truth of the matter is that when you find a woman like this, I don't think there's many. I think we're be just as hard pressed to find a man, a good virtuous man as well. I think exactly the same about that. But specifically, we're talking about the virtuous woman here. She's very valuable, very rare, and is a wonderful, wonderful thing to have. So the heart of her husband does safely trust in her. So the second thing we see about this woman is that she's trustworthy. She is trustworthy. The heart of her husband does safely trust in her. And he's trusting in her that she's going to be faithful. He's trusting in her that she's going to be loyal to him. He's trusting in her that there's nothing he needs to worry about, so that he shall have no need of spoil. In other words, he's not going to look for fulfillment of his needs somewhere else, because he knows that he has what he needs. So, and the same would go for a man, right? Someone who's trustworthy. There's a lot of men that are not trustworthy. A lot of men that are not trustworthy. The woman cannot trust her husband. He's not faithful. She doesn't know what he's doing. And all of those things. And so this goes both ways. That a husband and wife, they want to be able to trust each other. That's so incredibly important. That a husband and wife, when they're married, that they know that the other one is faithful. There's nothing better than the faithfulness of a husband to a wife and a wife to a husband, that they can trust in one another in their marriage. And then in verse number 12, she will do him good and not evil. So the third thing we see about the virtuous woman is that she is kind to her husband. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. As long as she's alive, if she's a virtuous woman, she's going to do good to her husband. She's going to be kind to her husband. She's going to be a help to him. She's going to do things for him that are going to help him to be a better person. She's going to do good and not evil. There are some women out there who their whole entire life, every day of their life, they're going to do everything they can to make their husband miserable. And that's not a virtuous woman. And then we have men doing the same thing to their wives, and that's an evil thing. It's going both ways. But here, and I think every Christian woman, we're just talking about the virtuous woman today, I think every Christian woman should think about this, as well as the husband, that every day we should be thinking, how can I do a good thing for my husband or wife? How can I do a good thing and not evil? I don't want to make their life less happy. I want to make it better. I want to make their life more happy. I want to make them happy to be around me. I want to make them to know that I'm going to take good care of them. So then it talks in verse 13, she seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. She's like the merchant's ship. She bringeth her food from afar. So what else do we learn about the virtuous woman? Well, she is a hard worker. And that's something that I've noticed. The virtuous women that I've met in my life, I've noticed that every one of them, those that I would actually say, and like I said, there's not very many, but those where we say, man, that's a virtuous woman. I could think of some. And there is a commonality between all of them, is they are hard workers. They're very willing. So that's what it says in verse 13. She worketh willingly with her hands. I'm just thinking in my mind, God is the ultimate judge about who's a virtuous woman, who isn't. So I'm not necessarily saying one is or one isn't. But I remember my grandma who died about 3 years ago. She lived to be 102. And she wasn't perfect, of course, and she had her moments like everybody else does. But I remember when we went to Grandma's house, we like going to Grandma's house. Y'all like going to Grandma's house?
Yes.
I don't have a Grandma's house anymore, but we like going to Grandma's house. And I just remember when we would get around the table and food was always there on time. She was up before everyone else, 6 o'clock in the morning, you heard the bath water going. It was just, she was like that. She was up very early. She didn't stay up late, which is a good virtue as well. 9 o'clock, that's it, And, I think had a lot of good virtues. But I remember we sit around the table, and she barely ate because she was always getting up and down. What can I do for you? What can I do for you? What can I do for you? Oh, you don't have enough of that. You need some more. And sometimes, she would always be a little assertive. You need more, But she had that care for people, and was just always checking on people. Was always going to the refrigerator and getting things. And do you have enough? I would finish my plate. Did you get enough? I'm like, yeah, I got plenty. But she would try to get you to get more. And just, I'm just thinking about that because it says she works willingly with her hands. I saw her at the sink washing the dishes. She didn't have a dishwasher, I don't think, for all those years she lived in that old house. She didn't have a dishwasher. Mm-hmm. She washed the dishes. She lived through the Great Depression. A lot of us don't know what that is. None of us lived anywhere near that. We're talking about the 30s, the 1930s. And she lived through that. She'd carry the water. Had to boil the water to take a bath. All those kind of things. She went through all that. But she was just always working willingly. Her hands, and that's a sign of a virtuous woman. She works willingly with her hands. She's not begrudging about it. She's not acting like she doesn't want to get up. She is working willingly. She's like a merchant ship. She brings her food from far. So she's going to work to bring things that her family... I'm not saying... at this particular moment, I'm not talking about working a job. I'm just saying she's someone... I think we have to think, too, about the time which this was written. A lot of times they had their produce growing in the yard, right in the garden. And so she would go out and get that. I'm not necessarily saying she went to work somewhere. I'm just saying that... she would get that food for the family. She would, whether they had a garden that needed to be tended to, or whatever the case may be, or she'd go to the merchants and get the groceries, And I'm glad I have a wife that gets the groceries because I don't like getting the groceries, okay? And if I could never step into a store the rest of my life, I'd be very ecstatic about it, all right? I'd love that. But here it is. So she's a hard worker. She riseth also while it is yet night, giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maiden. So here's another thing. I don't know what number we're on, but anyway. Here's the next thing.
We're going on number 5.
Number 5, okay. She cares for her household. She cares for those that live under her roof. So whether it be her husband, whether it be her children, whether that be her maidens. At that time, people had a lot of servants. They had a lot of people that they would, that took care of business around the house and things of that nature. And some people, I suppose, these days have that, but not too often. But she had maidens, and she wanted to make sure that everyone was cared for. Again, it reminds me of my grandma, the way that she wanted to make sure that everybody under that roof, is it warm enough? Is it cool enough? When you go to bed at night, are you warm? You got enough blankets? I don't have time she asked that question. Got enough blankets? Yes, Grandma. We got enough blankets. But always asking those questions. So she cares for her household. But see, she riseth up while it is yet night. Well, that means she's getting up early, is what that means. Now, I know it's not easy to get up early. I spent years doing that, and I did not like it. And I still don't like it. I still don't. And, you need sleep and all that. It's just saying that the sun shouldn't be high in the sky by the time you get up. It just shouldn't be that way. I know it's different. The winter, it's going to be darker than the summer and these kind of things. But, all the birds and animals shouldn't be all playing about before you're getting out of bed. You know what I mean? And so she cares for her household. And then verse, 16, she considereth the field and buyeth it with the fruit of her hands. She planted the vineyard. So here's another thing. She provides. And again, I'm not saying that she's necessarily the one working a job necessarily. I'm just saying that she's doing what she can to make sure that the people in her house have the food that they need. Of course, the man's going to be providing. He's going to be working. But she is doing her part to make sure those needs are on the table. Those needs that the people there in her house have. And so she wants to provide. Now, think about this too. A woman provides a lot of things for a home. She provides a lot of stability. When the woman is out of control, it just ruins the home. And but when that woman is there to provide some peace and to provide, that caring aspect, men and women are different, so they bring different things to the house. They bring different things to the home. And the man's he needs to bring the leadership. He needs to bring, he needs to bring that guidance. He's got to do that. He's got to be shepherding his family. He's got to be loving his family, training his children, things of that nature. But the woman's going to provide that motherly care. That the dad can provide that in certain ways, but really ultimately, when it really comes down to it, that those babies, those kids are going to need that mother. When it really comes down to it, she's going to be that primary caretaker of those. That's just the way God made it to be, because He gave different roles, and so. The man's going to be keeping that roof. He's the one that's going to be keeping that house and keeping that roof over everybody's head because he's providing for them. But ultimately, there's a verse in the New Testament, forgive me for not having the reference, but it talks about the woman guiding the house. And what does that mean? Well, it means the affairs of the home, the domestic affairs of the home. She should have that going, and she should be having a rhythm and just really keeping those things in order. Because the man, he's working a job, then he's coming home, he's taking care of his family. He doesn't need to worry about all the domestic affairs. He needs to be worried about what he needs to worry about. And then he needs to worry about guiding his family and loving his family. And so his job is not to, and he can help, of course. They should help each other. I think husband and wives should be complementary. I don't think it's like, oh, this is my job and that's your job. I think that's basically asking for division. It's not like, well, I work, so I shouldn't have to do the dishes. That's nonsense. We should help one another. Mm-hmm. We should help one another. So that means there's some overlap. The man can help and, hey, let me do the dishes for you. Let me put some laundry in. He should. The woman should help him at times when she, there should be that overlap many times. So I don't mean to compartmentalize it too much, but I am here to say, I think that those domestic affairs is the primary responsibility of the woman. Mm-hmm. And so a virtuous woman is going to make sure those things are taken care of. And anytime I've been around women like that, I think of my aunt who's like that, and everything is, And I'm not saying, I know, especially when you have kids, things are going to be scattered around. And all, of course, I know all about that. But just things were kept, things were put together, things were, you didn't, you weren't wondering where things were. You weren't, you knew that she had it taken care of, and that's just a blessing. And that's what we're looking for. So she provides where she can. And then also verse 17 gives us the next thing, that she is strong. She is strong. Here's what he says in verse 17. Yeah, number 7, she's strong. She girded her loins with strength and strengthened her arms. Again, strength is more of a virtue of a man for the most part. But the Bible's telling us here that a real virtuous woman is someone who she's worked hard to the point where she has some strength, And she's not just, there's a certain weakness that, 1 Peter 3 talks about. I think it's verse 7, 1 Peter 3:7, where, it tells us that the man is to dwell with her according to knowledge because she's a weaker vessel. So we understand that there's a certain element that we both have weaknesses. The man has weaknesses, woman has weaknesses. And the man has to understand that he needs to be understanding of kind of the feminine personality that in certain ways he's going to need a lot more strength to fall back on when it comes to emotions and things of that nature. He just needs to understand that. And he needs to provide that support. But then again, too, though, a virtuous woman's character includes strength. Because she works hard. She takes care of her family. She has some strength in that. She's not she's not just kind of going back and forth. But this is the way that she's living. She has that strength because of that work that she's put into her family. So then it talks about perceiving that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. Here's number 8. I think we're at number 8. Mm-hmm. Here's number 8. She is diligent. And I think that's so important. For the man and the woman. The man's got to be diligent in his job. He shouldn't be a man that's just a man, wait, where's he going to work now? He just quit his job over here. It shouldn't be like that. He needs to be diligent. But she in the home, she needs to be diligent also. And so he talks about her merchandise good. Her candle goeth not out by night. So I've thought about that. What does that mean? The way I see that is it means she's always ready. Her candle not going out, it doesn't necessarily mean the lights are always on. It just means that she's always ready to get up and help somebody. And I respect mothers because of the fact that you have to get up throughout the night a lot of times with babies and things. And they got to have that candle burning because, of those needs that come about. But, I think the virtue here we're talking about is diligence. That she's going to be diligent. She's not going to be lazy, in the way in which she does things in the home. And I think every person needs to really learn that trait of diligence. And I've found times in my life where I'm like, man, I need to be more diligent in certain things. And we need to consider those things. Being diligent. What does it mean to be diligent? Well, it means we're not only working hard, but we're kind of proactive, right? We're not just kind of starting things and not finishing them, right? But we want to finish what we started. Being diligent. Okay? It talks about her laying her hands to the spindle and her hands hold the distaff. Now, those aren't really machines that we're talking about nowadays, but the idea here that is given is the idea of sewing, weaving, making things. Now, I don't think that if a woman can't sew, she's not a virtuous woman. That's not every woman is good at that. And I know I'm not. I don't think that's a requirement to be a virtuous woman. But it just means that she uses her hands, right, to take care of things. She may not be someone who's making clothes, but she might be doing other things. She's helping people, right? That's kind of just a sign of being a virtuous woman. So it's not that we have to take this so literally that it's like, oh, she's got to be sewing, she's got to be making clothing. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But it does mean she's diligent. And I think that's the idea being conveyed. Now, I've met some women who could make anything. It's like, wow, Miss Patton, I was like that. It's like I ask her to make anything, and that's pretty amazing. Some people are, some people aren't, but the virtue is diligence that we're looking at here. And then she stretches out her hand to the poor, yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. So here's the next thing. A virtuous woman cares for the poor. She cares for the poor. She stretches out her hand to the poor. She reaches for the hands to the needy. So the virtuous woman is not only taking care of people in her home, but she has a heart for other people in need outside of the home. And so that's why, she is trying to, probably should be frugal with things because, she could help other people. And that's the idea here we're looking for. A woman who has a heart, not just for herself. That's easy to be selfish, right? It's easy to just think about your own need. Even like your own house. All you're thinking about is your own. And that's good that you're thinking about them. But sometimes we can even be selfish in that's all we think about. And don't realize, there's a lot of other needy people that I could use, the gifts that I've been given to help other people in need. So a virtuous woman, I think a man who has the right kind of heart is going to care for poor people. There's no question in my mind about that he's going to care for those who are in need. Why? Well, we know that Christ was that way. He talked about, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the dead are raised. And then the last thing he said on that list was, the poor have the gospel preached to them. So Jesus cared a lot for the poor. And people like Mary Magdalene and people like, all the poor people, Lazarus, he really cared for a lot of poor people. And if we have the heart of God, we're going to care for the poor. So may God help us with that. We live in a society that, you get what you want pretty much. I mean, it's easy. You can live your whole life and ignore the poor, and people do that. You can live in a mansion, and then 5 miles away, there's a bunch of poor people living in tents. And it's easy to just ignore that, or just not even to think about it. But I think we have to be a little more intentional. If you're living in other countries of the world, I'm just thinking of some different countries, like in Africa especially, but even in Asia, other places where there's a lot of poor people, then those people are around you. You'd see them all the time and maybe be more inclined to help them. But in America, we just don't see it as much. You can walk into a grocery store and you're walking in next to another person. You have no idea that they got 2 cents in their checking account, and you're fine. You don't necessarily know that, but I do think we should do our part, whatever that part may be. We could donate to things or whatever the case is, but doing our part to care for the poor people that are around us that sometimes get overlooked. So she cares for the poor. And then 21, verse number 21, she's not afraid of the snow for her household is clothed in scarlet. I just said that she is giving. She's a giving person. I think it's important here. She wants to make sure her house is taken care of, and others outside of that as well. Verse 22, she maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gate. So she's a giving person. It says down there in verse 24 that she delivers girdles to the merchant. So she is giving towards others. And then we see here in verse number 23, her husband is known is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. And so, like I said earlier, a virtuous woman is someone who wants the best for her husband, right? She wants him to be an important person. She wants to help him to be the best he can be. And sometimes the best thing about any man is his wife. A lot of times, a man is not what he, sometimes you may look at a man because he's in the public eye or something. Man, it's, you think a certain way about him, but not knowing that he's got a woman at home, that's really taking care of things. And I'll be honest with you, I think that her being the woman that she needs to be helps him to be the man he needs to be. There's no question about that. And the same goes for the man. The man that he needs to be is going to help his wife be the woman that she needs to be as well. So, let's see, verse number 24, she maketh fine linen, selleth it, delivereth girdles unto the merchants. Well, I also said that she's resourceful. That just means that she's not wasting things, right? She's not wasting resources that God has given. She shouldn't be wasting money. I shouldn't be spending frivolously or spending in an unnecessary way. Also, using the things that she has and really not wasting, but being resourceful with those things to help her family and to help others. It's easy to waste things, and again, we're living in a country where things are wasted. If we knew how much food was wasted every day, we'd be sick.
Yeah.
And a lot of that food is perfectly good to eat. And it makes me sick sometimes thinking about me. I don't always finish my plate. Why I can't eat all that? It's like, and some of it, you just end up throwing away. You don't get it all eaten or whatever. And we do live in a wasteful society. And I've been trying to think about that myself because it's so easy, just little things that you do, just wasting things. And I think we all need to think about that. So the woman kind of has a responsibility of in her home, using those resources that God has given her, wisely. And may the Lord help all of us with that. So being resourceful. I also said that she is a helper to others. She is a helper to others. It talks about delivering girdles to the merchant. So she's wanting to use what she has, the resources that she has, to be a help to other people. Verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. Here's another thing, okay? Whatever we're at here. She is, number 12, she is honorable. She is honorable. She's an honorable woman. I've met people all on that spectrum. I've met people that I want to honor. I've met some people that don't give you a lot of reasons to honor them. So, you have a wide array there. But we want to live our lives and say things and do things and act certain ways that makes people honor us. That's honorable. That's the way we got to live, to exemplify Christ, is to live an honorable life so people can, not just because we want people to respect us, but we want to honor God, right? Isn't that ultimately what we want to do? And with our lives, we want to honor our Lord because He's worthy of that. No question about that. So a virtuous woman is an honorable, someone that other people will automatically honor. She doesn't need to try to procure that. She doesn't need to try to get people to respect her, but it's automatic. And that's one thing you learn about respect is you earn it by the way you live. You don't demand it. You shouldn't demand it. There's some people who try to demand it, and I don't respect those people. But I respect those people who get honor because they deserve that. Okay, what else? She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is a law of kindness. Okay, here's another thing. She speaks with wisdom and kindness. She speaks with wisdom and kindness. So how are we going to have wisdom? Well, we're going to have to be in the Word of God. So I think we have to say that a virtuous woman is someone who's in her Bible, and she's learning things from her Bible, because it's going to help her to be a woman of wisdom and kindness toward others. You ever met a person who just seemed like they did not know how to speak a kind word? And that's bad. But a virtuous woman is someone who always, to the best of her ability, not always perfect, but to the best of her ability, her words are kind. And I've met some wonderful people like that I've never heard a cross word. I've heard those kind and gentle, sweet words. What a wonderful, that's so rare. I've met very few like that in my life. And so, in her tongue is a law of kindness. A virtuous woman is going to speak kind words. A man who is a virtuous man is also going to be speaking kind words. And not going off on people, flying off the handle. No, a virtuous person has to keep that under control. And her tongue is a law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household. Well, that's similar to the idea of her being diligent. She eateth not the bread of idleness. That just means she's not lazy. Idleness is laziness. And then, kind of coming in for landing here, verse number 28, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. So, is she asking for them to do that? No. They're doing it because they see her life. They see the way that she lives. They see her characteristics, and they praise her. She's not asking for that praise. In fact, she's probably bashful about it. She's a virtuous woman. She's not doing anything to be praised. And I've met people like that. I know that they don't do what they do I'm here thinking of people right now. They're not doing so that somebody will talk about them or say, look how wonderful this woman is. No, they're doing that because that's their heart. That's their heart. And a woman like that, her husband is going to be praising her. And he's going to be talking about how wonderful his wife is. And by the way, a husband and wife should never be talking bad about them behind their back. And that's just something that, my wife and I put in practice that we just don't feel that that's acceptable. We just don't think that's right. I'm not saying we've never teased or anything like that. I'm just saying we don't want to make it a habit of talking negatively about the other person behind their back or at all. We shouldn't be doing that. But instead, when we can, we should praise one another. We should talk about the good things, the good traits. Okay, here it is. So here's the next number, whatever it is, 15, I think.
14.
14. She is, that's good because we got 2 more things, so we'll have 15 things. So number 14, she is praised by others. So she's not looking for it. She's not asking for it. She's not expecting it, but she is praised by others. Notice in verse number 29, many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. And it says, favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. That's not to say that being favorable is bad or being beautiful is bad. No, not at all. He's just saying that these things in themselves can be deceitful. So someone say, man, I think of some movie stars out there that it's like everybody fawns all over, man, and they just love this person. It's like, yeah, but they're not virtuous. They live profligate lifestyles. Well, that's not something we want to exemplify. So they may be favored by others or even beautiful. And the saddest thing in the world, one of the saddest things in the world I've ever seen is a woman who's extremely beautiful, but she just sells her beauty by the way that she lives. And that's so sad. Oh, it's so sad. I just want to weep about that. Because, God has given her that beauty, right? That's a gift from God.
Yes, sir.
And to think that that's being squandered by living, a life where you just give all that away is so sad. It's so sad. And God wants, God gives you beauty, then that should be used for good. Favor is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. So the most important thing about a woman is whether or not she fears the Lord. That's number 15. That she fears the Lord. She fears the Lord. She may also be a beautiful person. I've met a lot of people that were beautiful inside and out, And so she could be a beautiful person. She could be a favored person where people do favor her. But the truth of the matter is, that's not what God ultimately is going to judge. When you stand before God, God's not going to say, how many people liked you? He's not going to say, were you beautiful? God's not concerned about that. He could have given you those things. But the question is going to be, did you fear the Lord? Did you live for the Lord? Because that's the most important thing. Because the other things can really throw you off. The other things can really deceive people. And you think, man, they're an amazing person just because of how they look or something. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. A woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Okay, here's the last verse. Give her the fruit of her hand. So in other words, let her own works speak about her. She doesn't need to talk about herself. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her own works praise her in the gates. A lot of women like to praise themselves and talk about themselves. A lot of men do the exact same thing. They just want everybody to know how awesome they are. And they just want everybody to know about themselves. But see, a virtuous woman is not always talking about herself. The things that she does in the life that she lives is enough to talk about her. And just those things themselves will praise her. So God's praise, here's a good thing to end on. God's praise is what really matters, not the praise of other people. What God says matters. So her own works praise her in the gate. She's a humble person and does not have to speak for herself, but those things will speak for her. I believe that's a virtuous woman. And may God help us all to have some of these virtues. I want to, don't you? And I want to have these things in my life. Good. Looking forward to next week. We're going to go to that next subject I mentioned. Actually, we had one other thing I needed to deal with, but it shouldn't take the whole time. And then we'll go into that. Looking forward to it. And I've enjoyed the study today. Let's pray and we'll go to the service.